Hello everyone, this is a Geek Must Have, and I'm planning a grand experiment. The question for Windows users, have you ever wondered how difficult it might be to move over to a Linux desktop? This is the first in a series of videos called the Peppermint Experiment, where as I'm a developer, I'll show you how my Linux migration experiment worked. If you are interested in how to install Peppermint 10 and setting up a few basics like Remote Desktop, Chrome browser, and Microsoft Visual Studio, then watch this video. Peppermint 10 was selected because it is being touted as the Linux distribution to use if you are migrating from Windows 10. Peppermint 10 is a lightweight Linux distribution based on the Ubuntu 18.0.4 long-term support LTS codebase, which means it's going to be supported until April 2023. Less is more. I agree. Peppermint 10 does not pre-install a bunch of applications. In this Peppermint Experiment video series, I will show you tips on how to install some popular software applications. There's a new program called ICE that helps to integrate web applications or websites into the Peppermint 10 system menus. Basically, you go to the system menu to do everything. Now, while the Peppermint community may not be as large as the Windows or the Ubuntu communities, it is growing rapidly. To have a laboratory to perform the Peppermint experiments, GeekMustHave got an inexpensive HP dual-core notebook with 4 GB of memory and 45 GB of disk, and then installed the Peppermint 10 distribution right over the Windows 10 operating system. To commit myself, I didn't even bother to back up the original Windows 10 installation. I may regret that decision in the future. The Peppermint notebook is being used on a daily basis for any and all tasks that would have been done with the Windows notebook. Now, I have to disclose that I do have some experience using Linux distributions like Ubuntu, Crunchbag++, Debian, and Red Hat. I will do my best to use that experience to make it easier for those who haven't gone down the path less traveled. Let's get started with the Peppermint 10 installation. You'll need to download a copy of the Peppermint 10 ISO, and it's the 64-bit version. And when you click on that, there is a direct download link, and it will download the Peppermint 10 ISO, and it's only 1.5 GB, but it may take a little while to download. The next step is to get a USB thumb drive that is at least a couple of gigabytes in size, and use a program called Etcher to flash that ISO onto the USB and make it a bootable device. So we'll open up Etcher. If you don't have it, Google it and download it. We'll select the image, which in this case is the Peppermint 10 image right there. And then by clicking on the flash, it will take the ISO, copy it over to the USB, and make the USB bootable. In order to use the USB drive that we just created in this laptop and boot from it, we're going to have to change the boot order. And to do that, we're going to go to the BIOS setup, which is F10. From here, we'll move over to System Configuration and down here to Boot Options. From the boot options, you want to make certain that the UEFI boot order is the USB, CD, DVD-ROM, or whatever it's called on your machine. And if there's another USB diskette, it's it. And then the last one is the OS Boot Manager. Then you hit the F10 key to confirm and save and exit this. When you do this, make certain that the USB drive is now plugged in to the laptop. Now when the laptop reboots, you should see the Peppermint screen and it's starting up. The Peppermint desktop has now started, and the only icon is the one in the upper corner to install the Peppermint 10 operating system, and this will install it onto the hard drive. When it opens up, we will say we want English as the default language. Click on Continue. And then pick the English and English keyboard and click on Continue. And it will connect to a wireless if you have one available. And I strongly suggest that you do connect to one, as I'm doing here, because if there are additional updates that need to be added from third-party vendors for video drivers or video players or whatever, it's good to have the connection enabled. And here I am connecting to Defiance. Now that we're connected to Defiance, we can click on the Continue button. And the whole objective of that was so that we could install third-party drivers. So you need to check that. The next item is we want to enter the password for the secure boot of this PC. Now we'll click on the Continue button. The default is to install Peppermint next to Windows, but I've decided to commit myself, so I'm going to erase the disk and install Peppermint, and then click on the Install Now. So now we'll pick the time zone, which by default is correct, and click on Continue. And now enter my name, John Schuster, and go down to the computer name. I decided on calling this Peppermint 01. I will regret not having keyed this in correctly the first time. Now I'll enter a username, and in this case it'll be jshust2. Then I will key in a password that will be used for jshust2. And I should click on the Require My Password to log in. Just as a security precaution, click on Continue. Now the installation will begin and the files will start copying. After the software has completely installed, you have the option to continue testing, but click on the Restart Now and remember to remove the USB drive from the laptop. When the laptop restarts, you will get the login screen where you need to key in the password for the account you just created. And the desktop for Peppermint 10 will load. Now to get started, it's a good idea to just look at the menu in the lower corner and go through some of the various menu items that are available to you by cruising up and down. One of the first things I do on any new Linux install is to open up the terminal and do a update of the distribution. It's done by typing in anytime you use sudo, you'll need to confirm with your password for the account. During the update process, It will check the repositories for the Bionic release and figure out how many of the packages have the possibility of being upgraded. The next step is to actually do the upgrade by typing in because you are running sudo, you will need to enter in the password for this user account. The first time you do an upgrade on a new system, it takes a considerable amount of time, so this part of the video will be sped up. The upgrade has completed. The default wallpaper for Peppermint 10 is not a bad wallpaper, but I would prefer something a little more personal. I will use the Firefox browser to download the wallpaper I made for the Peppermint Experiment from the GeekMustHave Open Stuff repository. Open Stuff is the area where I share files for any of the GeekMustHave videos. And here is the Peppermint Experiment, and here are the assets, and this is the wallpaper that I made. And now I'm going to save this wallpaper by right-clicking, saying Save Image As, and I'm going to save it in the Downloads area. The next step is to go to Menu, type in the beginning of Wallpaper, and you'll see Wallpapers at the top. We'll click on that, and there's some wallpapers in there already. We need to click on Preferences, and those wallpapers came from this directory. We want to add the download directory. Now, I know there are some people that will say that download directory is not a good place to put the wallpapers, and they should be put in the official wallpaper place for Peppermint 10. But for the time being, this is how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to add a directory. I'm going to add the downloads directory. I'm going to click on OK. And now you can see that the wallpaper we just downloaded from the Open Stuff area is here. I'm going to click on that and say Apply. And close this out. And voila, the wallpaper has been changed. I wanted a way that I could show the other videos I have planned for the Peppermint Experiment without having to use a video camera. I haven't quite got the video camera knack of lighting, frame, and focus against a laptop screen that seems to have more reflectivity than a mirror. The idea here is to install a remote desktop server like the Virtual Network Computing, called VNC, and then use a VNC client like the one that's in XMOBA term to display and capture the laptop screen directly on my Windows desktop where I do the video editing. The next segment of the Peppermint Experiment startup is getting the remote desktop installed and some tips on how to keep it running. The VNC server software is in a package called Vino, V-I-N-O, and we will use the Synaptic Package Manager, which is the package manager for Peppermint 10, to find it. We'll use our password. And it's loading all the various package repositories. And we'll say, let's look for V-I-N-O. And there it is. And by the check mark, you can see that it's already installed because this is what I'm using right now to record these videos. But when you click on this, the Vino will be installed, and we will make some changes to it to make it easier to use. There are a few settings that I will change for Vino. One has to do with disabling VNC encryption. In the past, I have had some VNC encryption issues. I wouldn't suggest doing this if you're using VNC over remote computers, but since I'm doing this all in the lab, it's not a problem. So I will open up the terminal. And I'm going to be using the gsettings command. And I want to disable the requirement that when you call to the remote system that you have to enter a password. Now again, I wouldn't suggest this for using it with remote systems, but I want to avoid having to key the password in every time I attach to the Peppermint Experiment laptop. So this is another gsetting command. And now the password requirement has been eliminated. To start the Vino server, we'll type in this command, which is user lib vino and vino server. The Vino server will be launched, which is the VNC server, and it will listen on port 5900. Now I will use the VNC client that comes inside of MOBA Xterm. And MOBA Xterm is my go-to package for anything that has to do with networking. And I have already created a VNC session here called Peppermint 01. And when I double-click on it, it opens up the Peppermint Desktop for me. And I can go to full screen. And now I have the ability of displaying the Peppermint 10 desktop and recording it directly through Windows. I use the Chrome browser as my main browser because I have Chrome extensions installed that make life easier. I have LastPass, which is the password manager I use. I have ASCII Doctor, which displays ADOC files in the browser. There's actually a separate video on this, and there'll be a link in the description below, and a card should show up in the upper right-hand corner. I have Evernote, which is what I use to take notes and screenshots of various websites I go to, and Grammarly to help me look like English is my first language. The next segment of the Peppermint Experiment startup is the installation of Chrome, or Chromium as it's known. To install Chromium, we will click on the menu, and then we will start the Synaptic Package Manager. We'll key in the password. Wait for the repositories to load, and now we will type in Chromium. And there is the Chromium browser. So we will mark this for installation. Say yes, we would like it marked. And then we'll click on the Apply to have that package installed. Apply again. Downloads the package files. Installs the software. And we will now close it. We'll close the Package Manager. And now when we go back to Menu, we will see there's a Chromium Apps actual group now. And when we go to Internet, there is the Chromium web browser. And we'll click on it to open it. And here it is opening. And it's going to my start page, which has all of the web applications I call on a regular basis. And as you can see over here, all of my extensions have been installed. Now, I bypassed the part where all of the extensions asked me to log in and give me the authentication, just to show you that all of my extensions are now available to me. The Microsoft Visual Studio Code Editor has become the most recommended text editor and developers' integrated development environment, also known as an IDE, on the web. It is an open source editor that runs on Linux, Windows, and Mac OS. I use VS Code to develop applications in Node, PowerShell, Bash, and Python. I use VS Code to do all of my documentation using the ASCII Doctor markup syntax. I'll have a link to this in the description below, and a card should pop up in the upper right corner. Just like Chrome, I have VS Code extensions that help make development and documentation easier. The next segment of the Peppermint Experiment is getting Microsoft Visual Studio Code installed. To install Visual Studio Code, we will start by clicking on the menu and clicking on the Synaptic Package Manager. We'll key in the password. And the package repositories will load. Now we will type in Visual Studio. And the package we want to install is just called Code. So we will click on that and mark it for installation. And then we'll apply and say yes, apply. And now the Visual Studio Code and any other packages that might be useful will be loaded and configured. Changes have been applied. We will close this, close the Package Manager, and now I will go back to Menu, and we will go to Development. And there is the Visual Studio Code, which we will click on. I'll maximize it. There's the file folders of the File Explorer. There is the searching. There is the source control, which is Git, which is built into Peppermint 10 automatically. There's the debug function, and there are the extensions to allow the extensions, probably one of the more powerful features of Visual Studio Code, to be installed. You may have noticed that when packages are installed, they're automatically added to the system menus in the proper category. Now, I like to have access to some of my most used applications directly from the desktop. An example would be Terminal, the Synaptic Package Manager, the Chromium browser, and Microsoft Visual Studio Code Editor. The next segment of the Peppermint Experiment startup is the creation of desktop shortcuts. To start adding desktop shortcuts, we will do like we do all the time and click on the menu and find one of the applications. In this case, Terminal, that we use on a frequent basis. We'll right-click and say Add to the Desktop. Terminal has now been added to the desktop. I also have Synaptic Package Manager. I'll add that to the desktop. We also have the Chromium web browser. We'll add that to the desktop. And we also have Visual Studio Code. Right-click and add that to the desktop. And now we have the applications I use on a frequent basis on the desktop. This has been a long video because it included the Peppermint 10 installation over Windows 10. The video also included the applications that I consider critical for starting up to use Peppermint 10 as a developer. The other videos in this Peppermint experiment will address the installation and configuration of a single item of software in a single video. This should make the videos much, much shorter. The Peppermint laptop has earned a few badges, which it will display proudly on the lid. If you were entertained a bit, learned something, or laughed just a little, press that like button. Leave me a comment with suggestions, requests, or even criticisms. I try to respond to any and all comments. If there's some application you use in Windows and want to see it running on a Linux desktop, drop me a comment or a message. Now here's an upfront admission. Not all Windows apps run on Linux, but there may be an alternative. Show your support to my channel by subscribing. Every subscriber I get makes me smile just a little bit more. I have a channel and a personal goal of 500 subscribers by the end of the year. Be one of those subscribers. I have a companion blog at GeekMustHave.com where I ramble on about all things technical. Stop by and visit me. I'll leave my email in the description below. Thank you and have a good one.